So we've got Sophie with us today from
Hi.
the Mindful Theory Trainer. Sophie, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm great. Yeah, really loving what you're doing on
Thank
all the
you.
socials
Thank
and
you.
what you're doing for the industry. I think there's a need for it. I've spoke to, you probably know, Chris about the theory stuff.
Yeah,
So yeah, I spoke to him and there's definitely a need. Learners struggle with the theory. So I
yeah.
really appreciate what you're doing. But before I take everything and share it all out, do you want to introduce yourself so everyone knows who you are and what you're up to?
Yeah, okay. I'm Sophie. I'll get it out there right at the beginning. I'm not an ADI.
Okay.
I don't claim to be a driver training expert at all. The reason I'm sat here today is because I learned to drive, started that 2 years ago, passed my test last year. And during that time, I actually spent 18 months working for the driving school that I learned with. So I mean, that was just an incredible experience because firstly, I overcame my driving anxiety and I got my license and I've got my little car outside. So that's an achievement for me. But I got the experience of seeing what client-centered driver training looks like when it's done to an incredibly high standard. And I got to see it from both sides. I got to be on the receiving end of it and learn this whole new skill. And then I got to be part of the team. My role was student support, as we called it. So I was helping to look after our learners. I was, doing marketing. I was dealing with inquiries from parents, a lot of which were to do with theory and the support that we offered from, Theory Test Pro. And I was looking after instructors, ADIs and sort of PDIs in training. And I just went from this little person who thought, I'm never going to learn to drive. I can't do that. That's for other people, to this person who was learning more and more about driver training, as well as learning to drive. And I just developed a real passion for this industry. So now what I'm doing is I'm offering theory support to anyone who is struggling with that for any reason. I struggled with it because of anxiety. Also, in my case, undiagnosed ADHD. I think that makes that side of things a lot more difficult for some people. And just lack of self-belief, really. I just thought, oh, no, I'm too stupid to pass the theory test, aren't I? That's never going to happen. So I'm supporting people with that. And something else that I feel really strongly about is the mental and emotional well-being of driving instructors, because I think in the 18 months that I was working in the industry, it became apparent to me that the job ADIs do is not easy. And I think there are a lot of people out there really struggling with their mental health. I mean, I know Chris said this, I feel like I'm paraphrasing Chris a lot, but it's a real problem in this industry that driving instructors are struggling with their mental health or their emotional well-being. And I just think if I can use what I've learned, and yeah, I'm now certified in mindfulness-based CBT techniques. So if I can use what I've learned to help instructors, that helps them because it helps their well-being. And I think that is so important. It helps them to help their learners as well. And their learners are people like me. I was this little learner just a couple of years ago, and that that can benefit that whole dynamic both ways. Happier instructors, happy learners. That's what I want. That's what I'm here for.
That sounds great. You're going in a direction to you, it sounds like you just want to help people.
Oh yeah.
With the mindfulness CBT,
Hmm.
is that something that you've been doing recently? Was it something that you was working on previously or as you was learning to drive? Kind of when did that come into it?
Um, well, the driving school that I worked for and learned with use CBT techniques in their coaching. In fact, I think they were one of, certainly in our area, one of the first driving schools to do that. It was this incredibly innovative approach that I really benefited from, and that was kind of what piqued my interest in how CBT can help with driving anxiety. The mindfulness is something that I sort of came to separately. I mean, I've had a lot of CBT in my life. I don't mind admitting, I've had CBT for depression, anxiety, and I've been working on mindfulness as a way of kind of looking after myself in terms of my driving anxiety, which I really struggled with quite badly. But also, just as a working mum and general pressures of life, I got really into mindfulness, and then I saw this opportunity to do a diploma in mindfulness based CBT, and I thought, oh, that sounds right up my street. And maybe that could help people, and the stars kind of aligned. So I got certified to do that, and I thought this could be really beneficial to, you know, the people around me in this industry. I hope it works.
I'm sure it will. Like the
Mm.
theory test gets, I think, overlooked.
Oh yeah.
Um, I spoke about this quite openly on previous episodes. The support I was offering my students
Mm.
was not great, and there's been a
Okay.
huge change recently. Um, and if I can't offer them the support that they need, then sending them to someone like yourself
Or Chris
is,
Burns did.
yeah, I just wait. It's your episode. We're going to send them to you for today.
Okay.
But yeah, Chris is doing the same, and
Yeah.
yourself. And I do think we need it because of the amount of learners that are out there as well.
Mm.
Um, if everyone just goes to a handful of people, there's probably not going to be enough people providing the support. So I think
Mm.
what you're doing on the social media as well, I'm following your Instagram page, Facebook. I think it's great, the
Thank you.
content that you're putting out and sharing for learners. Um, but how does this link then with the theory test, the learners, and the mindfulness CBT? How does that help learners, have you found? Or what's the link there?
Really, I mean, I'm basing that on my own experience because I started learning to drive before I passed my theory test. I had 4 months of lessons before I got my theory done because I was just putting it off and putting it off. I mean, I understand the point of the theory test. It's to understand what the theory side of driving. You need to have a certain level of theoretical knowledge of what you're doing in order to implement the rules safely. And I just think part of the issue for me was that I had this real disconnect between this app I was using and the questions I was being expected to answer and the things I was being expected to know, and then getting in the car and driving. And well, how does this apply to what I'm doing? And it was because I was so anxious. And so, I mean, there was, for me, a really big element of low self-esteem. So I'm sat in this car thinking, I can't drive. I'm a terrible driver. I'm going to crash because I don't understand what that road sign means, or I don't understand how to control the car. You know, which one's the brake again? That never happened. By the way, I never crashed. But it was only when I started to use the mindfulness techniques that the theory came in. If I'm probably not making a lot of sense there. So it was when I was using mindfulness to be more present in the car, to be aware of what I was doing, of how I was feeling. So I'm driving along a dual carriageway. It's 70 miles an hour, so it's really fast. I'm feeling a bit freaked out. What do I need to do? I need to make sure I'm safe by, you know, checking my mirrors. That was when everything I'd learned about the highway code came back and started to make sense, because it wasn't just, here's this big book of road rules, read them, pass your test, then go and have some driving lessons. It was, this is what I've learned about how driving works. This is what I've learned about the rules and the laws about driving. And now that I'm feeling present and I'm not becoming overwhelmed with the anxiety, now I can go, it makes sense. This is what the rules say, therefore this is how I drive safely. Instead of panicking, thinking I don't know what I'm doing, and doing something really silly like, I don't know, coming to a safe and controlled stop at a green traffic light, which I did want during a mock test. I mean, I was 70 hours deep at that point. What an idiot. But you know what I mean? So it's just, it's having that toolkit as an anxious driver to be able to implement what I've learned. Because I think for a lot of people, you pass your theory test, you go for your driving lesson next week, and it's all gone out the window because it functions as a memory test. You know, you're
Yeah.
learning what you need to learn to get that pass mark, to get your piece of paper, to get your theory test certificate number, to book your practical test, to get your license so that you can go to the Mackey's drive-through. You're not necessarily looking at theory as being the thing that builds the foundation for you to be a safe driver and a confident driver and a happy driver. So if you can get the mindfulness in at the theory stage, I just think it lays the groundwork and it sets you up to enjoy learning to drive.
So your mindfulness, we'll
Yes.
maybe come back to the theory test in a moment and how it
Mm,
kind of helped you. Um, but can you offer support? I know kind of your brand is around mindful theory trainer,
mm,
but I'm assuming what you're doing then is not just the theory test, but more support and training around the bigger picture and then making drivers less anxious during their lessons and then giving them the confidence to go and do their theory test.
yeah, I mean, it started around the theory training just because that's what I've been doing previously. And I'm going to reiterate this time and again. I'm not an ADI. I'm not qualified to teach anyone how to drive. And I'm certainly not qualified to teach instructors how to do their job. But, I actually have got a client at the moment who has passed her theory test, but we're working together because she's got this sort of mental barrier. She's booked her test like 3 times and keeps postponing it because she's got this mental block that means even though she's passed the theory and she's progressing in her lessons, she can't bring herself to go to that test and overcome that sort of final hurdle. So that's something that we're working through with CBT techniques. So yeah, I mean, what I do can be applicable to learners who have passed their theory. I think it's applicable to PDIs. I think it's applicable to ADIs, but that's where the brand started purely because that's what I started out doing. It was coaching theory.
Yeah, I don't think you need to worry too much about not being an ADI. I think
Mm,
what you're doing is you're supporting ADIs, PDIs, learners,
mm,
but what you're supporting them with, I don't think you need to be an ADI. And
mm.
let's be honest, you don't need to be an ADI to teach someone to drive. So you don't
Well,
need
you
to
just to
clarify that.
charge, I
Just
know,
to
but
charge. Yeah. So don't
yeah.
worry.
I mean, I've not even
Um,
had my license a year yet, so yeah,
uh,
I don't think I should be teaching anyone to drive at all.
but it's the mindfulness that I find interesting. And
Mm,
like I said, I don't think it's about teaching someone to drive. It's about
mm,
teaching someone to understand themselves and what's going on in their mind
mm,
so that, like you said, you could relax and focus on the learning. But going back to your lessons and your
mm.
theory test with the mindfulness, was it more as you became more aware on the lessons, more relaxed and started taking it in? Was it that then gave you the confidence to book your theory test and go and take it rather than being met with self-doubt, or was it kind of aligned up differently?
For me, I started my lessons and I made reasonably good progress. I mean, I was incredibly anxious, but I had a really good instructor who was really understanding, really patient. So it got to the point where I really didn't want to take my theory test because it felt like this huge thing to me. The Highway Code is this massive book. And I thought, I'm never going to learn all that. I'll never remember it. But I have to pass my theory test if I want to pass my practical test. And I'm really enjoying my lessons and I'm really getting a lot out of it in terms of, making progress learning to drive, but also I think I learned a lot about myself from that experience, that I can tell myself time and again I'm not capable of doing something, but guess what? I am. Um, yeah, it was this is going to sound so pompous. It was a real journey of self-discovery, learning to drive. And that it was booking my practical test was the incentive to get the theory out of the way. And with hindsight, I feel a bit embarrassed about that because the theory should be regarded as an important part of the learning process and a foundation that you need if you're going to, be a safe driver for the rest of your life. It shouldn't be, literally a box ticking exercise that's multiple choice. Just get it done so you can do the fun part. As you were saying with Chris, with young people learning to drive, would they rather get in a car, in my case a Mercedes, so a nice snazzy car, and go and drive it around for a bit? Yes please. Or would you rather sit and do some homework? Well, what are you going to choose? The theory just felt like an admin exercise, and looking back on it, I wish I'd taken a different attitude, and I wish I'd spent some time going through the apps thinking, I need to learn all this so that I can get out in that nice car or the Nissan Micra that I drive now and, enjoy driving because I know how to do it safely and I understand the rules of the road. And, if everyone knows what they're doing and what's expected of them and what can be expected of other road users, we can all kind of bubble along together and use the road safely. And I think theory doesn't get anywhere near enough recognition, partly because so many people out there, and I think parents of young learners today didn't have to do it. Like for me, it wasn't apparent. I started learning when I was 26, so it was my husband who was helping me, but he's 17 years older than me, so he didn't have to do a theory test. So he didn't understand, very much about it, and I had to explain it to him so that he could help me. And he was quizzing me on road signs and things when we were out and about, but I had to teach him all about what it was that I needed to learn. And people say to me, "Are you nervous about your driving test?" And I say, "Well, I can't book it yet because I haven't got my theory." "Oh, what's that? Is that the thing where you click when you see a motorbike?" And people just don't appreciate the importance of it. And I think that's something that I personally want to sort of advocate for a bit more, because I think knowing how to drive safely and respect the rules of the road is just as important as knowing how to find the bike or change gear. It's a holistic approach.
Agree with you on the rules. I think where the difficulty is sometimes is almost the structure of the theory test and the way it's run. Because it's like you said, it's box ticking. You got vote for Joe, multiple choice. So most people can guess the way through. And then you get good old Chris's saying failed by one. And I guess that's where you and him can make a difference for people, because it's that last step that's needed to get those extra points.
And it's knowing what you know, but learning what you don't know. I've worded that so badly. We don't know what it is that we don't know. Like, I'm supporting a learner at the moment. I live in Norfolk, so there are no motorways near me. I think our nearest one is Cambridgeshire, and I'm not going to Cambridgeshire. I can't be bothered. So this learner didn't understand certain aspects of motorway driving purely through inexperience. She just hasn't either driven on a motorway or even been a passenger on a motorway. So things, theory to do with what colour are the studs on this side, or if you've got red studs to the left of you and white ones to the right, you're stuck in the middle of which lane. And just, she didn't know. And you don't know what it is you don't know until you try and take a test on it. And that was what was tripping her up. She was brilliant at hazard perception, really good. So we ended up having a session where we talked about what a motorway actually is, how you use them, what they're for, and then we were able to work things out, like when can you overtake on the left on a motorway? Well, using what we've just learned about what a motorway is and why we use them, what can we deduce about when you might do that? And actually, when you have that knowledge base, you can then sort of logic your way through it and go, okay, well, maybe this makes sense. Maybe this is the safest thing to do. So I guess I'll take that answer. And oh, look, it's correct. But sometimes you need that bit of guidance. Otherwise, you're just sort of clicking buttons and memorizing which is the right one to click for next time until you pass. And I don't think that sets anyone up for safe driving, really.
No, it certainly doesn't. And some of the questions do almost make me question why they're in there, like you said about the motorways. But I guess you've just made me look at it from a slightly different point of view. When you asked me the question, what colour studs are where? I'm like, don't know. When I'm on the motorway, I'll tell you.
And you're
where
an instructor, yeah.
But when you then look at the question and build the bigger picture, you can then build more information around it. So it's not just about that. It's having, I guess, a deeper knowledge of what it is. Because I know I'll joke about it, but things like the studs on a motorway, I've had to routinely refresh on lots of things like that you almost take for granted. Because I'm now trying to support some of my learners, not quite at the level that you guys are doing. But we tend to just go through a few questions on a lesson, and then every now and then you get an odd worded question where we have to decipher it to then make the question make sense. And then add logic and you can find the answer. But
it's not just knowing the theory, is it? It's knowing how to pass the theory test, how to interpret the questions. I did a post about this a few weeks ago about how to answer theory test questions. And the first thing you do is read the question. And then the second thing you do is read the question. You read it again, you pick out what I call the question words. So words like what, speed limit, dual carriageway. Pick out the words from the whole sentence that tell you what you're being asked to do. And then you can go through the answers and you're basically just matching the answers to the question words. It's not that straightforward all the time. I wouldn't say that's foolproof as a formula for getting the right answer, but really often if you read the question, you can find the answer. Now, you do say a lot of the questions are quite badly worded, and that is where I think a lot of people just trip, because the theory test isn't setting out to trick you, it's setting out to test your knowledge. But whether it does that in a productive way that brings out your knowledge so you can use it, so that you know what it is and you're equipped with that theoretical understanding, I don't know. I mean, you were saying about, the vehicle watch schemes, things like that, and how they're defunct now. Maybe that does need updating. I would second what was said about that in your previous episode. And yeah, I'm certainly not the first to say that it does need an overhaul, but for now we're working with what we're working with. So my intention is to help the learners learn what they need to know, and then help them learn how to get through that test situation to apply their knowledge and pass the theory test. Because the other thing is, it's for a lot of the learners, it's not even about understanding speed limits and road signs. For me, part of the issue was that, when I was at school and I used to take exams, I fell apart. I had to sit a physics, that was a written physics exam, and they, that room where it's deathly quiet and you've got whole rows of people and there's teachers everywhere and it's just eerily quiet, and then they said, oh, you can begin now, and I opened the exam paper and I burst into tears and had to be removed from the room by an invigilator, because anything like that makes me panic. It's a really unnatural environment and it makes me feel anxious. And I think that's an issue for a lot of learners. You can do all the mock tests in the world. I did not hundreds but tens, and I was getting 90 plus every time, percentage wise. Went to the actual test and I passed by 1 mark for both the hazard perception and the multiple choice, because when it actually came down to it and the pressure was on, it's not that easy. And it does feel a bit like being back at school, and it wasn't a fun experience. I mean, obviously they have to make sure you're not cheating or anything, that you haven't got any notes with you. I was heavily pregnant when I took my theory test, and they checked the bump was real. And that I wasn't just stashing a copy of the highway code that was baby bump shaped. I don't know what they thought I was doing, but it was a really high pressured environment. And I think overcoming the nerves for that is, for me, it wasn't the same as the actual practical driving test, but it was very similar because it felt like there was a lot riding on it. I was very aware that I couldn't book my practical test until I passed the theory, and I needed to get X amount of marks for hazard perception, which I wasn't very good at. And remember to click in the right time, and what if my hand's shaking and I click the wrong thing, and all these different anxieties that were down to more than just knowledge and understanding. And that is something that I'm using the mindfulness and the CBT techniques to kind of help people overcome, because otherwise people who would otherwise be able to do it are kind of tripping themselves up. And that's I think why so many people are failing it so many times. I know people who've taken theory tests in double digits, not because they're not capable, not because they don't understand theory. I mean, some of them have got experience on mopeds and all sorts. They just can't pass the test. It's not accessible to them. And I think the role that I'm trying to create for myself here is to kind of make it accessible. That's the aim.
Yeah, you said a lot of things there that
Yeah, I didn't stop talking for about 5 minutes.
It's great. But I'd not thought of a few of those things, like the anxiety and nerves for the test. I mean, I don't know if you saw the episode where I spoke about my theory test to become a driving instructor. I failed it twice before I then passed. That wasn't through nerves, that was more through lack of preparation and overconfidence. I passed a number of theory tests before, so I'll be all right with this one. And I wasn't all right with this one. But I do have a few students, and I've had a few in the past, where they've said they're nervous, they're anxious, or they failed, and maybe I've not acknowledged quite why,
Mm.
because I've not seen that side of it. For me, when I was doing my theory test, it was just, I'm going to some room, I'm going to sit at a computer, I'm going to give it a go and see how I get on. I wasn't too nervous.
Mm.
And then when I went in for the third one, I was like, I'm £300 down now. I've got to
Well,
pass
yeah.
this one because I want to be
Yeah.
an instructor.
There's that additional pressure, isn't there?
Yeah. And then I started second guessing everything and questioning, should I be doing
Mm.
it? But yeah, being aware of the anxiety and the nerves is certainly something I think I can take from what you said there. And it's
Mm.
definitely relevant for a lot of my learners at the moment, which I found fascinating. Is that kind of similar to the support that you then can offer ADIs and PDIs? Is how how can you link it to them and help people with the stresses of the job? I know you mentioned it early on,
Mm.
but they say this industry maybe at the minute isn't the easiest to work with. So
Yeah, I mean, in terms of PDIs, they're a lot of the time they're surprisingly similar to the learners in that, they have all the same kind of, well, not all the same, but very similar hurdles to overcome. You have to pass the theory test, and it is a lot more rigorous. I know this because despite not being a PDI myself, I have the app and I do practice the PDI test in my spare time, like a loser. But that they still have to overcome that in order to achieve their goal. For the learner, it's learning to drive. For the PDI, it's having this new career as a driving instructor, but still something that you have to overcome and you have to prove yourself. And there's the financial commitment as well, like you say. With the part two, I've spoken to so many PDIs coming to me because they're nervous about their part two in the same way that I was nervous about my actual driving test. It's weird how sort of the parallels there between the learner and the trainee instructor. And yeah, I just think for PDIs, it's this whole new commitment and this whole new experience, and it's intense. It's a lot of training, and in that respect, they're a lot like the learners. Now, the ADIs I approach very differently, because I've worked with ADIs in the past, and not only worked with some, but I've networked with other instructors, outside of the driving school that I work for, all over the country, really. Since I started this, people have been really welcoming. Everyone just wants to message me, oh, what are you doing? This is new, this is different. Who the hell are you? Kind of thing. And things I've noticed about instructors is that there's I would describe it as like a wedding cake of stress. I had a call with Terry from the Instructor Podcast, and we kind of talked this through. So it's like you have these layers. So this bottom tier, you've got all of the demands of being an instructor. So maybe you've got 20 pupils a week, and you're trying to get all of them to test standard. Maybe some of them are ready and they can't get a test. Maybe some of them got a test next week and they're nowhere near ready, but they can't rebook for 6 months. Maybe some of them are struggling with maneuvers. Maybe some of them have, XYZ issues that you're trying to work through with them to get them to test standard, to help them be the best drivers they can be. So this is the first tier of the cake. And then the second tier of the cake of stress is you've got, maybe you work for a driving school and you have all these franchise commitments and you have to fulfill certain obligations and getting all your students, or maybe you're self-employed. So you have to deal with all your own inquiries. You have to call everyone back individually when they call you for driving lessons. And most of the time you have to say, well, it's a 6-month wait because you can't get driving instructor for love nor money these days. So then you have to constantly turn people away. You have to manage your waiting list. You have to manage all the admin of running your own business. And then you have to do all your marketing, your social media. You have to liaise with your pupils' parents. And there's all this other pressure. But when you've just done a 10-hour day of teaching, so that's like the next tier of pressure on you. And then you've got this next little sort of cakey tier of pressure where you've got a standards check looming and your pass rate is maybe dipping. You're a bit concerned about that, and you're meeting certain indicators for a standards check, and your students are getting these faults, and how do you work that out, and how do you improve that, and what CPD do you need to do, and are you going to pass your standards check, are you going to get a grade A, all this stuff piling up. And then like the top tier of that wedding cake is yourself. You're still a person. It turns out driving instructors are people too. They don't just crawl under a rock at the end of the day. They are people with lives. And I think this busy career that you have can be really all consuming. And then when you've been teaching for 10 hours a day, 6 or 7 days a week, when do you find time to be you? And when do you find time to kind of take the key out of the ignition and say, okay, how am I today? I've helped all these pupils. And if you're anything like in the instructors I know, and there are a lot of them, it won't be just a case of, I'm going to help my pupils remember to check their mirrors. I'm going to help them with their parallel parking. You know, you'll have pupils who are preparing for their A levels and they've got all this sort of stress, and they've got people, you know, maybe their parents are paying for their lessons, so they want them to pass first time, so they feel like they're under pressure, and you're helping them with that. You've got learners who will be doing their lessons and then going off to uni, so they want to pass first time, or maybe they have to delay things. All these things going on that you're supporting them with. You know, I read an article, I want to say BBC News, about, you know, should driving instructors get counselling training? Should driving instructors become therapists? And I remember thinking my reaction to that little headline, they already are. They're not officially recognised as being therapists, and a lot of them are not formally qualified as any kind of counsellor, although I know some of them who are, which I just think is brilliant. But, you know, you're performing all these different roles, and it's like, when do you switch off and say, actually, this is affecting me? I need to talk. Maybe I'm not okay before you have to get in the car tomorrow and do it all again. That's where the mindfulness comes in, because you are going at a million miles an hour all the time. You shouldn't be. You should be going within your speed limits. Sorry, it's a terrible sort of analogy, but we can only do what we can do. So mindfulness, I think, brings you back to yourself in order to be the best instructor that you can be.
Yeah, you said a lot of things there that I can resonate with. I like the cake tier and all the different things, and I'm sat there like, tick, tick.
And it just conjures
tick.
an image, doesn't it? Just sat in your car, just eating this cake of stress. And you know, it's heavy. It's a really dense sort of brandy soaked fruit cake that you're trying to eat there of stress. You know, maybe you need to just, you know, put that down. And I think the analogy breaks down a bit there, but you see what I mean? It's just this sort of burden that you're carrying that just builds and builds and builds.
Yeah, and that's not even including everyday life and the stresses from there. That's where I've struggled until recently to find the balance with that. I'm now easing off lessons. I'm not doing anywhere near as many lessons as I was. Financially, I'm not in as good a position, but
yeah,
it's you've got to find that balance, and that's something that I've been conscious of. So we'll talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about the mindfulness CBT then. How can that help people eat their cake, untie it all?
You don't need to eat the cake. What you need to do is get one of those fancy schmancy knives and sort of cut the cake into little slices, maybe put it in little boxes. You know, the cake analogy is wearing thin, it must be said. But I mean, okay, so I'm going to clarify a little bit more about what it is that specifically I do. Because you have sort of mindfulness in the general sense, which is brilliant. I know, you know, lots of people who are really into mindfulness in terms of learning to be present and clarifying your thoughts and kind of awareness of your thoughts, and you know how that really helps us in terms of emotional growth. I know I can recommend San Harper, who is really into, you know, that mindfulness stuff, and, you know, Guild of Mindful Driver Trainers. She's brilliant. She is so knowledgeable, so approachable. I mean, I've gone to her, you know, to talk about sort of mindfulness things. She's just absolutely brilliant. I recommend her to everyone, driving instructors or not. Just go talk to Stan. She's a wise woman. And that's a very sort of traditional form of mindfulness, where I think mindful CBT comes into its own. Is you've got that element of accepting your thoughts and your feelings kind of non-judgmentally, because I think that's one of the key sort of tenets of mindfulness, is a non-judgmental viewpoint of your thoughts and feelings. You're present in yourself and you are present in the situation. So for example, you know, I'll use myself as an example. I'm going to be present in the moment right now. So how am I feeling? Do a quick body scan. Well, I'm feeling tense and my legs shaking. Why am I feeling like that? Well, I'm filming a podcast and I'm really camera shy, so that's making me anxious as all hell. So I'm shaking a bit. So how can I non-judgmentally accept that? Well, okay, so I'm just going to sit here. I'm just going to be anxious, and I'm going to tell all your viewers right now that I'm really anxious. And I'm just going to be present with that for a bit. Just accept it. I'm not going to fight it and go, oh, no, I'm not going to be anxious and I'm going to talk at a million miles an hour, because that's how I'm going to push my anxiety down. I just pretend I'm not feeling anxious. Everything's fine. I'm not anxious, because that is just going to keep all my adrenaline going, and it's going to make me feel a million times worse. And I mean, I'm going to start getting fidgety. We're just going to be sat here being anxious on a podcast. And then you bring in the CBT, which when I first started studying it, seemed like a bit of a contradiction with mindfulness. How can you have mindful CBT when mindfulness is, I acknowledge how I feel and I accept how I am in the present moment? And CBT is, I'm going to take my faulty thinking patterns and just rip them out and replace them with better ones. What? And in the end, having studied and trained in it, mindfulness tells you how you feel right now. CBT techniques are the journey you go on to get to how you want to feel. So we acknowledge what's going on, what you're thinking, why you're thinking it, how your thoughts affect your feelings. And then we can use, I don't want to get into too much jargon because I just think that's really alienating for people, but sort of behavioral experimentation and then kind of cognitive reprogramming, there's two big words there, to try to make your mind a better place to live in and then to be in. And as an instructor, you can then use that in your lessons, and as a learner, you use it to enable you to learn better. So, for example, mindfulness CBT says that we all have thoughts, automatic thoughts, and they lead to feelings, and feelings lead to behaviors. And this is all based on things like core beliefs. It all gets a bit complicated, but I'll try and, not dumb it down, but just condense it so that I do eventually stop talking. So you'll have a core belief. Like in my case, the core belief was, I will never pass my driving test. And then the automatic thought that arose from the core belief when I sat in the driver's seat of a car for the first time was, if I turn that key and if I put my foot on that accelerator, something bad will happen, because I can't drive. I can't safely control a car. I won't be able to move off safely. What if I don't remember to brake? What if I damage the car? It's not even my car. What if I hit an old lady, or worse, a puppy? What's going to happen? So the feeling that I can't drive, the core belief that I can't drive, led to me thinking I'm going to fail, I'm going to crash. So then that leads to a behavior. And the behavior in my case was sit in the driver's seat and hyperventilate. I was shaking and crying. I mean, I once tried to turn right at a junction and I burst into tears. Sorry, I tried to turn right into a side road, as they would say in theory land, and burst into tears because I stalled. And that behavior of losing control of the car came from the thought, I can't do this, which stemmed from the way I was thinking and feeling. But I wasn't aware of that at the time because I wasn't doing the mindful CBT at the time. What we can take from that is that if we challenge that, and you have to be present and mindful and understand what you're thinking to know what you need to challenge, you can analyze your faulty thinking. So you're driving along and you come to a red light and you stop. Light goes to the amber, red and amber one, and then it goes green. And you've got the bite and you've set the gas and you've taken the handbrake off and you've moved off. Compare that with the thought of, I can't drive this car. I'm going to kill someone if I try and drive this car. You can say, well, I experimented with that. I did a behavioral experiment and I drove a car for a mile. I didn't hit anyone, didn't crash it, didn't scratch the car, didn't stall. What does that tell us about our thoughts? How does that make us feel? And by being aware of any anxiety we're feeling in the car, any negative thoughts like, Could be as simple as I can't drive, could be a little bit more nuanced, like I'm scared of roundabouts because I was once in a car accident on a roundabout, or I'm scared that I will be in a car accident on a roundabout. You can use the CBT to reprogram the way you think about those experiences. I still don't like roundabouts, but I've done them a million times. And I know from past experience that I can navigate them safely. So, what I then tell myself is past experience teaches me that if I complete my observations, if I use anticipation and planning, if I'm aware of road signs, if I look at the road markings, I can make sure I'm in the correct lane. If I make sure to use my signals, if I look at what other road users are doing and slow down and give myself time to respond to other road users, I can use a roundabout safely. So I've used mindfulness and then applied CBT to go from I can't drive to I'm scared of roundabouts to I can overcome roundabouts to I did that roundabout because I know what to do. And it's that way of going on that journey from fear to safety, to confidence, because you've been mindful enough to go, I'm scared of this, I don't want to be scared of this, then what do I do? Mindfulness based CBT, it's a little bit confusing for some people, but it's looking at what you think and why you think it, to put it very simply. And I think every learner driver can benefit from that. And I also think instructors can benefit from it, because in order to help your pupil, they need to have the self-awareness to understand what's holding them back. But then they need the tools to tell you, the person who's trying to train them, what the problem is, what they're struggling with, and what help they need, because you are not a mind reader. And if they understand why you're freaking out about turning into a side road, then you can meet them where they are and make it client-centered and, you know, personalize the teaching to their needs. And I just think that makes everyone's life easier, basically.
Yeah, it's something that I'm very early in my journey of learning. But again, a lot of that I can relate to with my learners, and I'm trying to improve with it, asking how they feel and why things are happening. Like one of my favorites was, and I get a lot of students that say very similar, but one that always stands out, we were stopped at a red light and the student looked at me and was like, I hate these traffic lights. And we'd done a road, a number of traffic lights. I hate these traffic lights. Like, why? I always stall at these traffic lights. And then you can guess what happens next.
Yeah.
But I wasn't all that aware, and I'm still not. So it's something that I'm certainly going to be learning more about. But I then decided that we'll just keep talking. When we stop, we'll have a conversation. We'll keep the conversation going, because I knew the student could drive. But as soon as, I guess, it links to the mindfulness and the thought process, as soon as that thought's allowed to come in, that's what's going to happen, because they're worried, panicked, they're going to rush, they're going to stall. But as soon as we had a conversation and just didn't think about it, it was fine.
Yeah. So this learner's developed an association between these particular traffic lights and stalling. So then it's like, you know, what I was saying about automatic thoughts. The automatic thought is, I will stall at these traffic lights. That leads to a behavior of not being in control of the car, because that's the expectation that this person has. So it sounds like you've done exactly the right thing of, you know, from a mindfulness perspective, of keeping them present in where they actually are and having, you know, a conversation with them, rather than letting their thoughts spiral into what could happen or what's happened in the past, you know, because that, if you're trying to move forward, literally and figuratively, and, you know, you want to stop making those kind of mistakes, yes, you have to learn from times when you've stalled at traffic lights, but it's not helpful to dwell on it to the point where you think it's going to happen every time, and then it just becomes this barrier.
So is that something that you offer to PDIs, ADIs? Do you support them with their own mindfulness, or can you also help people to then help their students, or does it all kind of interlink? Once you understand it in yourself, you can almost help your students with it?
Yeah, I think it is interlinked. And I think if I'm teaching mindfulness to instructors for their own needs, then you can apply that to pupils. But I mean, I'll do both. I'll do whatever people want. I'm basically here to support in whatever way people feel is needed. And this certificate, this diploma that I did in mindful CBT, it wasn't specific to driving instructors. It was just general mindful CBT. The reason I'm applying it mostly to ADIs is because that's the industry I was working in at the time, and that's what I've become really passionate about. But I think for a lot of instructors, the things that are causing difficulties, I'm trying to word this carefully because I'm very aware of confidentiality. Things that cause difficulties are not the things that are going on in the car. They're the things that are going on when you get out of the car, be it your finances, business things. It could be work related. It could be your standards check that you're terrified of. It could be family issues, any kind of personal issue that's causing emotional distress. Anything could be holding you back because we're all human and we'll feel things and we're affected by that. So I think having the ability with mindfulness to kind of take a step back and put the brakes on, as it were, helps you, whether the issue is in your personal life or your career. To do that, it just gives you a chance to reflect, and it's when you're aware of your thoughts and your feelings that you can be in control of them. And I do think it's this sort of awful irony that the people who most need mindfulness are the ones who are the least likely to have the time for it and the least likely to carve out the time to go, okay, I'm going to go and meditate now. And that's a real shame. But I just think the more busy you are, the more chaotic life is, the more people you're teaching, the more hours you're working, the more you need to take a step back and check in with yourself. So primarily I do mindfulness-based CBT stuff with instructors for instructors. If anyone were to come to me and say, I want you to coach me in how to do this because I've got learners who are really anxious or struggling with hill starts or crying and freaking out during lessons, I will gladly do that because I've been that anxious learner. I've cried and had panic attacks, and in my case, I was able to tell my instructor all the reasons that I felt I was having those problems and be really honest and say, I've struggled with certain problems in my life and this is how it affects me. So if I burst into tears in the car, it's not you, it's because I've struggled with a certain problem and now I'm feeling sort of triggered. And it was able to be a safe space where I could say, here's my trauma. Not everyone is going to feel comfortable doing that, but for certain instructors who are dealing with issues in their pupils where they're anxious, to have that foundation of, well, here's how you ground them, here's how you help them overcome the physical panic, here's how you help them through negative thought cycles. If anyone wants to come to me to train in that, you can book via the website. No, seriously, I'll happily talk to anyone. Message me anytime because I'm all about getting the word out there and helping people with those skills. But also, it's not just. I'm going to say this, really emphasize this. It's not just about your pupils. How many instructors do we know who work like 25 hours a day because they want to get every pupil through their tests? They know every pupil has got their own story, their own reason to need their license, whether it's to get a job or to go to uni or to go traveling, and they genuinely want the best for everyone. So, oh, you want 3 lessons this week and I've got no availability. Well, you can have those 3 lessons because I want to help you. Oh, you've booked your test and we did that without you discussing it with me, and it's in 2 weeks' time and I'm supposed to be off that day. Oh, well, I'll take you to your test anyway because that's more important than my day off. We all know 50 people who've done that, don't we? And I think sometimes stepping out of that and having the mindfulness and that time for you, that's what it's about. That's how you can be the best instructor you can be, in my opinion.
I agree with that. Like I said earlier on, I've been rearranging my diary,
Mm,
establishing what my priorities are with everything. So
mm.
I stopped doing evening lessons, and then decided to start a podcast. And this has made
Okay.
me busier than driving lessons,
Okay.
surprisingly.
Yeah, fair enough. I
But
can see
it's a
that.
different type of stress for me because I'm sat
Mm,
at home. I can put the children to bed, and
mm,
then I can do whatever I need to. So this for me is uh, easier to manage, although busier than what the equivalent worth of lessons would be.
okay.
But getting a grip of my diary and making the most of gaps is certainly something I've been more aware of recently.
Mm,
But I'd like to go back a little bit about what you said with your instructor, because you're fairly recent, and I'd be interested to hear from an instructor's point of view.
mm.
Um, when you said you was talking to your instructor about maybe anxiety that you've got and a few other things, did it make it easier for you to speak to your instructor at the time? Because I think you've mentioned that they use CBT and they're maybe more qualified to discuss these things with you than an average driving instructor, or was it personality driven? Why did you feel comfortable to speak to that instructor?
I think it was a bit of both, really. The instructor that I learned with was recommended to me because he'd helped a friend who was anxious. So I kind of knew this is someone who's very sympathetic to the anxious learner experience, has a lot of empathy. And then the way in which those CBT skills were used during the lesson, I definitely felt you could tell this was coming from a place of, I want to help you and help you overcome the thing that's stopping you getting better at driving. In my case, it was car control because I was nervous, and part of the reason I was so nervous about potentially making a mistake was linked to all sorts of ancient trauma that I am definitely not going to get into on your podcast. But I felt able to sort of, to an extent, open up about and say, well, this is what I've experienced. This is why I'm reacting to a seemingly minor mistake by sobbing in your car. And then that's when the personality driven side of it comes in. I think you need, if you're going to teach someone who is anxious and you're going to teach them specifically to drive, so that's potentially dangerous. You're in charge of a dangerous bit of machinery, 2 tons of metal flying around at 60 miles an hour. The person in control of that needs to be in control. So you're trying to help an anxious person. You have got to be patient, and you've got to be kind and understanding. And I think having someone who is just willing to say, yeah, I accept all of that and I'm going to help you in a non-judgmental way, I think that was what made all the difference, in all honesty.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that because I do get a few students that come through with anxiety, and I make it quite clear from the beginning, because I think a few come from recommendations, but I make it clear that I'm not a counselor, I'm not
Mm,
qualified in anything, but I'll try my best to understand what they're going through, and we'll try and kind of piece it together through the lessons. But I think being able to offer that, or at least something at a very basic level, to introduce it to the student for them to maybe come and find someone like yourself,
mm,
is a great asset to have in being able to, for me to send anxious learners to someone to talk to,
mm,
is only a good thing, and it can only help the learners, because I expect if you didn't have a patient instructor that you had the good relationship with. I've gained a few students recently that was on the verge of giving up learning to drive.
mm.
And I expect if you'd have met the wrong instructor, you'd probably have had a hard time of learning
Oh yeah, I
with
think I
everything.
would have given up if I hadn't been able to learn in a supportive environment that was tailored to me and my needs. Yeah, I wouldn't have a full license right now. I wouldn't be sat here doing this. But, I think it's so crucial to click with your instructor and to have that rapport, because you're going to be spending what, 30, 40, in my case 70 hours with this person, and that they're helping you learn to drive and they're keeping you safe in that situation. You've got to trust each other. And I know a lot of people, I forget the percentage, it just came out earlier today, I think. Something like 60% of learners have at some point been unsatisfied with their instructor. Why is that? And how can instructors, who I'm sure are doing their absolute best at all times, many of them, how can you meet your learners where they are to give them the best experience, but to make your own job easier?
Yeah, it's with the mindfulness that you said. I think there's probably a link to the long hours and the stress and saying no to students. And I think
Yeah.
just all of that stress probably adds up. And the difficulty is if you've got 20, 30 students in a week and you have a bad day, that one student might be that one that's like, I'm not happy with my instructor. The instructor just had an off day. And it's difficult. It's not easy. But I think what you're doing and a few other people like yourself, the mindfulness and the mindfulness CBT can only help us deliver better lessons and help our students progress quicker.
Yeah,
And if
I
your
hope so.
students are enjoying the lessons, you're going to enjoy it. And it's going to grow rather than just become a challenge and you've got to try and manage everything. I think being aware is, yeah, it's good what you're doing. And I'm
Thank you.
interested to see where you go. I'll be giving you a call at some point to figure out how I can help my students,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime.
But with your social media as well, we'll quickly talk about that because what you're doing on there is great. I'm
Thank
following
you.
it. I don't know how you put out so many posts that you do because I can't keep up with half
Neither
the
do I.
posts that you put out. But you do have quite a lot going on social media for people to um, take knowledge from, along with the theory test and some of the questions. I've seen you do the flashcards on, I think it's Instagram or Facebook. I don't know. On one of the
Yeah.
social medias with your
Yeah, on
cool
both of them
videos that you
actually.
do. It's both.
Yeah.
How are you finding that? Are you getting much feedback from the content that you're putting out? Or
The feedback has been just unreal. I started this tiny little account and it grew to 100 followers in 10 days, which was well beyond what I was expecting. And then, I've been putting out this content and it's been nearly a month now and it blows my mind every time I get a little notification that another, maybe an instructor or, there's, like car insurance companies or other relevant social media accounts have shared my post to their stories so their followers see it. Every time that happens, even now, I do a little happy squeal and there's a little happy dance. When I get to maybe 1,000 followers, I might show you the happy dance. I just think the messages I'm getting saying, oh, that's really good advice, or I love what you're doing. I've run a survey about instructors' mental health and it was all completely anonymous. But one of the questions that I put right at the end of the survey was, is there anything else you'd like to say? And I got a couple of comments saying things like, oh, keep up the good work, thank you for doing this. Someone thanked me just for caring enough to ask, how instructors are feeling. And I got another comment in that box that said, you're a breath of fresh air. You're a breath of fresh air. Who wouldn't want to be a breath of fresh air? I just thought, wow, that's such lovely feedback. People have just been really nice. This is an industry full of really nice people. I've had a lot of support from people like Chris Benstow, which is amazing because I promise Chris, I'm not trying to take all your work. I think it's a bit of a slightly separate niche that I'm trying to carve out here. But I've had a lot of really great support from people like Chris. Terry as well has been incredibly supportive and just generally brilliant. Terry and I will actually be appearing at the Expo next month in Nottingham. That's the 8th of October, I believe, where we'll be recording a live episode of the Instructor podcast. So if anyone's coming to that, please come and say hello. I would love to meet, as many cool instructor people as possible. I'm really looking forward to that. And yeah, then the social media response has just been actually mind-blowing. I still can't believe that people are listening to me.
it's good. I'm enjoying watching what you're doing with social media. I genuinely wish I was better on the platforms. Um, I probably need to tap into you for some training on social media as well,
Yeah,
because
no, I'm happy to
I've
do that.
got my Facebook, my Instagram. Um, but yeah, I'm not the best on it. I'm growing my Facebook page for this, but the Instagram I'm not great with, and the consistency with like what you're doing, a few posts a day. I
Mm.
can't keep track of how many it is. I at the minute, this is where that balance, I know that I don't have the capacity to be putting stuff like that out.
Yeah, I mean, you
Um
are teaching, which I'm not, which I think makes a difference, possibly. I've got time to be sat, all day doing social media posts when I'm home with my kids. So yeah, I mean, don't be too hard on yourself about that.
I try not to be. Like I say, I wish I was better. And I'm sure in time, when I become more familiar with it and I've got a few decent
Mm,
templates, we can almost automate it. But we'll go back to the expo a little bit, because
mm.
I've spoke to a few people that maybe aren't aware of it. So I guess this would now be a good time to um, talk about that a little bit. It's in Newark, I believe. So
Yeah,
it's, excuse me, it's not too far. Well, I don't know, that side of the country. It's over your side of the country somewhere, isn't it?
it's
Just
about
north.
3 hours away from
Is it?
Norwich. Yeah,
Oh, not
yeah,
well.
Norwich is just too far from everywhere. Really inconvenient place to live. It's lovely here. I've actually got a blog post lined up about all the brilliant things about learning to drive in Norfolk. You have to overlook quite a few potholes, but it's a nice place to learn. So yeah, check that out when it goes live.
We
Um,
will link that as well if you want.
yeah,
But yeah, the expo, you and Terry, it's the eighth. It's the Intelligent Instructor and ADI NGC Expo, isn't it?
yeah,
For people that maybe haven't heard about it, I think a lot of my listeners are quite new to the industry, or at least
okay,
some of them are. So a few people haven't heard of it, don't know what it is. What I'll do, I will link it in the comments, because I can't
yeah,
put links in the description. I'm learning how to use YouTube.
yeah.
But you guys will be there doing a podcast there. How are you feeling about that?
Um, I was I was nervous about this. And this is just us on a Zoom call. So yes, there will be people watching. Hopefully, lots of people watching, because your channel seems to be growing beautifully. You should be really proud of that. Expo, they're going to be there for real, and I'm going to have to look them in the eye. So that's quite anxiety inducing. Actually, I'm not too bad with public speaking. I've plenty of experience with it. I went to theatre school as a kid. I've given talks, in front of packed churches and things like that. So I don't know why I'm so nervous about Expo, but I'm absolutely terrified. So I would say to your viewers, if you're coming to Expo, please come say hi and please be nice. Please be
I'm
gentle.
sure they will.
I'm
Hopefully,
scared.
we'll have a few of them coming out.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share or
Um,
get out there?
I mean, at the moment, I'm just kind of carrying on as I am. The diary is slowly filling up. I do have some availability, sort of evenings and weekends. I'm gradually taking on more clients, but the availability is there. So yeah, just shameless plug time now. My website details, everything that I offer in terms of, mindfulness based CBT coaching for instructors, for trainees, and for learners. There's different things I can offer depending on what the need is, but I'm happy to tailor that to the individual. So if you just need to talk, I think I can help, and you'll see all the feedback that I'm putting up on my website from previous clients. It's pretty good. I've got a few 5-star reviews, so someone thinks I've got something worthwhile to offer. And yeah, you're welcome to book via the website or message me if you want to talk things through first. The other thing I would mention, apart from this expo, is the brilliant Terry, whom I cannot thank enough, is giving me the opportunity to do some kind of theory stuff over on his channel. I don't know when that will be because we haven't really got much of a plan yet, but I'm so excited about that. he said to me, I've got a bit of a proposition for you. I think you might say no. Do you want to come do the expo? And I said, I'm going to have to think about that, and I'll let you know. And then I got off that call, and in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, where the granddad gets out of bed for the first time in 50 years, and he's dancing around the room. That was me. So yeah, I'm really excited to be working, with Terry to put, theory stuff out there, and just, generally creating more content that I hope will help people. I maybe have some ebooks coming up, if I can ever get those finished. They're about 20% written at the moment. They're just kind of sat on my laptop getting the odd paragraph added when I can be bothered. So that'll be on mindfulness for instructors in general. And I'm also kind of having a bit of a look at standards checks and how the fear of the standards check can be defeated with a little bit of mindfulness, and hopefully coming out with that sort of by the end of the year, I think. So yeah, watch this space for that.
Sounds amazing. We'll put any links that you want to go on. We'll put them in the description and in the comments so people can get to them. And keep me posted with your ebooks. As soon as they go live, we will get something out if you want, so people can get on.
I'll send you a preview.
Find them. Yes, it will. Yeah, and we'll share it. We'll get it on the Facebook page. We'll go from there.
Thank you.
But Sophie, it has been a pleasure to talk to you. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real joy to sit here and ramble at you about, thinking happy thoughts. Yeah, thank you for inviting me on it. I really appreciate that.
No problem.